that question, as well as the topics of equity, inclusion, equality, and diversity. So we have a large agenda. Our HCTC Equity and Inclusion Council worked very hard to put this panel together, and they've worked on it for several months. Our team includes community members, students, faculty, and staff. So thank you to them all for their efforts in starting this conversation. I'll give a brief introduction of each panelist to save time, and truly they all deserve more of an introduction. Then I will call on each panelist to speak for a few minutes about their experiences. We will hear from each of the panelists, and then we will ask questions. There will be an opportunity in the chat for questions from those attending if we have time. This is a Microsoft Teams meeting, so we can see your video, and we are also recording this for later use. Dr. Aaron Thompson hails from Eastern Kentucky. He is the president of the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. CPE is Kentucky's statewide coordinating agency for higher education. Dr. Thompson works with all Kentucky college presidents, including the University of Kentucky and KCTCS. Welcome, Dr. Thompson. We're proud to have you at the head of the table in higher ed.
Thank you, President Linden.
Mr. Porter G. Peoples, Sr. He is the president of the Urban League of Lexington and Fayette County, Kentucky. He has been empowering and changing lives since 1968. He also previously served on the Board of Regents for the Kentucky Community and Technical College System, and he is also from Eastern Kentucky. Mr. Peoples, welcome.
Thank you very much. I look forward, glad to be here.
Thank you. Ms. Emily Hudson, she is the pastor of Common Bond, and she also recently established the Southeastern Kentucky African American Museum and Cultural Center. She is a writer, a poet, and a musician, and that's just a few of her talents. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Next, we have Mrs. Shia Robinson. She is with Berea College, and I know her from her work with the Kentucky Association for Blacks in Higher Education. She serves as a student engagement specialist for the Emerging Scholars Program, which is a TRIO student support services program. Welcome, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you so much, Dr. London.
And finally, we have Jamaica Miller. Jamaica is a Hazard Community and Technical College student, and she is also one of our student ambassadors. She is a recent graduate of Buckhorn High School, and she also participated in our HCTC Multicultural Leadership Program. Welcome, Jamaica.
Thank you, Dr. Linden.
So first, we're going to start off, and we're just going to hear a little bit from each of our panelists about some of their experiences. So Dr. Thompson, I'm going to start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your story, where you came from, how you got where you are today, and what you experienced as a person of color?
Thank you, President Linden. It is important that I at least say this to all of us that are listening. We all have a story, and the story gives us an opportunity to be emotionally intelligent enough to have conversations with people that may think different than we do, or may act different or look different. So the story, whether it's mine or yours, has an important part in this conversation. I wanted to say that before I say anything else. But our story isn't just something to be said as a way of an expression of exactly telling you something about us, but it should be an expression of also telling you something about yourself. So how can you see yourself in my story is an important question to ask when we are telling our stories. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, Southeastern Kentucky, more specifically in Clay County. I was born up Crawfish Holler for all of us folk here. My parents met in 1937 in Sassafras Holler, there in your neck of the woods. And father worked in a coal mining camp, black coal mining camp. My grandfather moved from Alabama with my grandmother and my mother, who happened to be this gorgeous 17-year-old woman who met a man who had never been married, by the way, of 36, Aaron Sr. and they got married and had 9 kids. Moved back to Clay County. I was born in a log cabin in the hills of crawfish, if you want to call it that. And of course, I had to have a midwife because there were no hospitals to go to. And if you're African American, you couldn't have gone anyway. So I'm the youngest of 9 children. I was born in this sharecropper's cabin with a dirt floor. My father was illiterate, wrote his name with an X. And my mother had an 8th grade education. She was the educator of the family. Of my 8 brothers and sisters, only one graduated from high school other than myself. So I'm a first generation high school student, first generation college student, and first generation, you name whatever student afterwards that I was. In my life, I've been in places, for an example, went to an all black school and was integrated. And after I was integrated, didn't have another black teacher since. That's why I'm dedicated to actually recruit and hire as many people of color in teaching as I possibly can and to close gaps. So President Lyndon, I keep on going forever with this conversation. Bottom line, I'm saying that education truly is a path to this equity conversation. It is a path to think about racism and anti-racism. It is a path that opens the future. And my story in dealing with what I dealt with coming up through the system and what I've learned is being used still to shape, as you all know, higher education in Kentucky to make sure that everybody, no matter where you're from, the hills of Kentucky or down in the west end of Louisville, to have an opportunity to explore the opportunities that education can bring. We've just got to do a better job in doing that, as well as having these kinds of conversations that you're offering us today to have. So thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And yes, I truly agree. Education is a path. It is a path for change. It is a path to success for many of us. I'm working on my navigation skills. Mr. Peoples, can you do the same? Can you reflect upon how things have changed since when you first started working with the Urban League till now?
Okay. I was so infatuated with Aaron's story that I got caught up in it and forgot I might have to talk. So let me catch it back up with you guys. And the reason I was so infatuated with that story, the thing that jumps out to me about Aaron's story is when he talks about father being illiterate. And there he is today sitting as the top person for education in the state of Kentucky. That's just marvelous. And I've told Aaron time after time how much I admire him and how inspiring he is just for having traveled that path and gotten to where he is. And that leads me to just a little bit about me, if it's okay right now.
Yes.
I too was born in Eastern Kentucky, born Lynch, Kentucky, educated in the Lynch school system, and I am here today as a proud graduate of the community college system, Southeast Community College. One of my points of personal pride was that I went to Southeast. I too was one of 9 kids who didn't anticipate going to college, but because the community college system opened there, and I was in the 9th grade, I was able to go. Able to finance that and attend. One of my proudest moments was when I was sworn into the Board of Regents community college, and even more proud when I was became the chair of the board. Those are those moments that you step back and say, wow, access and opportunity matters. It was the access that gave me the opportunity to do that. And I love sharing that with other people. Now, I want to just go back. I mentioned uh, graduating from going to school there in Lynch and then matriculating to Southeastern and then through the University of Kentucky. There's a part of my life that was end up being so relevant to what I end up doing in life. There was a tradition among Black families in my little coal mining town, among Black parents, was to send those of us Black teenagers away in the summer to spend the summer with relatives up north. As teenagers, we saw that as a getaway. It was fun. But we didn't realize that our parents had the wisdom to give us exposure to the outside world. So from the time I was 15 till I graduated from college, I went to Brooklyn every summer. At 15 years of age, I was working as a messenger for Midtown Manhattan in Brooklyn, New York. And over the years from 15 through, I had lots of different, I worked several different jobs over the summers. I raised that because that exposure helped me when I came to the University of Kentucky in 1966, when there were only about 50 African Americans on that campus. If I would still been coming from the small town directly there, I probably would have been intimidated. But after New York, UK was a piece of cake. So, and that was good for me in terms of my personal confidence and knowing that I could compete. And that's been my story all of my life, has been um, breaking down barriers, going into areas where most African Americans had not gone. And I just think my parents have given me the chance to do that, to put me in a position to be confident to do that, because that has been my life. I didn't know that I would end up doing this work, but that was the foundation for this life that I've led. And the good thing about the life that I've led is that I've been able to use what I've learned to help others. And every day I wake up looking for opportunities to be of help. Maybe it went a little longer than I should, but forgive me.
Oh, no, that was excellent. And I wrote down something that you said that really struck home with me, and that is that access and opportunity matters, because it does.
It does.
And that's what we're striving for every day with our students here in Eastern Kentucky, is access and opportunity and giving them those chances.
Yes.
So, Miss Hudson, could you reflect a little upon your work through your ministry in Eastern Kentucky in regard to improving the lives of minorities in the area, and maybe tell us a little bit about your experiences and your story, and also your recently established museum, which I think is so neat and so interesting. I'm very excited about it.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised here in Hazard. I love the mountains, and as a young girl growing up here in the mountains, um, in the late 60s, early 70s, and I remember watching the things on the TV, listening to it on the news about the things that was going on in the South and so forth. But I always felt so removed from that. And I guess the word is sheltered. I think I felt kind of a sheltered life growing up. I think I struggled a bit with identity, being Black and being Appalachian. Both of those cultures. There was a struggle going on trying to understand both of those. I went off to Berea College. I love Berea College. There's 4 of us. My dad sent 4 of us to Berea, and at one time there was 3 of us there together on campus. And my eyes were open to a lot when I went to Berea. I love my Berea College experience, met a diversity of people, and so I appreciated that experience. Afterwards, I lived in the big cities of Indianapolis and Cleveland, Ohio, and it was one of those experiences of country girl going to the big city. And I experienced a lot of things there. I worked in journalism a little bit, and I worked for a nonprofit organization there, working with young people. And I in some of those things there, I did experience racism because of being African American. There were some instances where I was discriminated due to being Appalachian. And I was told I wasn't black enough for the city. It's very interesting. Wasn't black enough for the city. I did come home in 1990, and it was like coming home and seeing my community in a different light. Sometimes you have to go away and then come back to have your eyes open to things, you know, the issues and some of the things that's going on in your town and in your community, as it relates to, you know, your people. I sensed that there was a tension, something beneath the surface, ready and waiting to erupt. There were racial tensions that arose sometimes, and the people came together, and you know, the chant was something has to be done about this, but nothing was, and eventually it became quiet again. And this was something that was repeated over and over and over. Apathy settled in. When apathy settles in, then the people, it's like becomes hopeless, feeling that there's nothing they can do to change their situation, and then they stop fighting for change. When I came back into the community and I saw this apathy, and I saw some of the things that was going on, and I wanted to try to be a change, a person that tried to bring about change. And I began to work with a couple of programs, working with our young people, working on their self-esteem, trying to instill to them their self-worth, that their lives matter, that their abilities, they can do these things. And then in 1993, the Lord gave me the vision for ministry, Common Bond Christian Fellowship Ministries. And at the same time, also gave me the vision for the museum. But, you know, as the way it goes with the workings of God and the timings of God, the museum didn't come about, but the ministry did. So we started a ministry that opens its doors to anyone who wants to come in, regardless of color and so forth. The museum, we are in the process of establishing this Southeast Kentucky African American Museum and Cultural Center, because there is such a need to collect and preserve our history in this area. And that is, you know, one of the main purposes. But we want to also be a voice and make an impact. You know, there's so many areas that we can make an impact, to create opportunities and open up access for our Blacks in our community. So that's all in the process. So.
Exciting things happening. Thank you. Ms. Robinson, Ashaya, can you tell us about your experience, your work at Berea, anything that you want to reflect upon, and maybe some of your work with the Kentucky Association for Blacks in Higher Education?
Yes. Again, my name is Ashaya Robinson, and so good morning to everybody who's on here. I am from Central Kentucky, Camelsville, Kentucky, which is the seat of Taylor County. And so I grew up in a predominantly the Black community. We are kind of all stuck together. And of course, like growing up, we learned the do's and the don'ts. And so some of the don'ts is, you don't go out into the county district if you see like a Confederate flag, that was kind of like a sign of racism for us. Don't go out, in the county district or any out what we call, the sticks. That's what we used to call the country. You don't go out there without any gas in your tank. You don't ever want to be out there stranded. And so I definitely did grow up learning the do's and the don'ts when it came to racism. But my mother grew up single parent household, low income, but I was very fortunate that I just felt like a seed was planted um, kind of close to the end of my elementary towards the middle school years of my life. My mother, she actually did end up going to school at Kansas University. And back then, that's when, you can bring your child into the classroom. And so I remember sitting there with my mother while she's, in the classroom. I'm sitting there taking notes just like she's taking notes. And so I definitely believe a seed was planted during that time of my life to get an education. And so my mother, she really did push community involvement. She pushed me to get A's and B's. She did not play. I cannot come home with, bad grades, and perfect attendance was definitely instilled in me. And so I'm very grateful to have that experience growing up. And I think during my community involvement, that's definitely where I noticed that there was a different culture difference between me and my white counterparts. And just to fast forward into high school, I did attend the Camelsville independent school system throughout my whole life, elementary, middle, and high. And so I can remember during high school was probably the first time that I truly recognized racism. And I think we all kind of truly recognize racism as a community because for some reason, Camelsville was known as the black school. And we're a small town. There's no really such thing as a black school. It's a predominantly white community, but we were known as the black school, and Taylor County was known as the white school. And so our first racial encounter was really our black male students, of course, would play sports, and they would date the white females. And so there was a lot of tension between the parents of the white females. They did not like the fact that they were dating the black males, the black athletes. And so we actually seen that like firsthand and witnessed that like they were very upfront about their children not dating black males. And so as a community, we had to face that, and they had to hide, in school to date black people. And so that was my first, I can say, truly racial encounter dealing with race. And so in Camelsville. And so for me, when it came to racism, my mom always taught me, to love everybody despite, their background, that we should love each other by our character. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And that's what I was taught. And so through that experience, I definitely knew like that was definitely a wrong experience. But as far as my education goes, I was very, very focused. Of course, like my mom was on me, so I had no choice. And so I didn't really get as much support, I would say, through the school system or in pushing me to go to college. But I was just so thankful that my mom did attend college so that she knew all the resources that it took. And so I can't say that I wasn't supported enough to push me to my potential. And so I had to be my own cheerleader in a sense to make it. And I was in AP courses and all that. And I would say that I was never the smartest black person in my grade in my school, but I would say that I had such a support from my family to push me that it made it seem like that. And I wish that others had the same support because there was so much potential within all the African American students, and that's really what drives me now is to have that support because there's a lot of African American students who just don't have that push, and that was something that I was able to have. And if my other counterparts just had that push, they would be here today, be educated. And so I went to Western Kentucky University, and my freshman year was also my first actual racial experience as far as targeting racial slurs to me and my friends. And so we were called monkeys in the cafeteria before. And so that was an extreme circumstance where some of my peers got in trouble because they started throwing some things. But we did definitely was called monkeys, and that was probably my first eye opener. Like, man, this is a serious situation, and I always had to kind of like watch my back of like what people might say. How should I react against these things? Because some of my friends actually did get in trouble. And I'm like, wow, they actually called us some monkeys, and yet we're the ones still getting in trouble, even though they're the ones who's calling us names. So that was definitely probably my last, I guess, as far as in school racial experience. But I continue on at West Kentucky, and I pursued social work with my bachelor's and my master's at West Kentucky University. And just through my collegiate experience, I was so supportive. I had a lot of support. Being a low income student, didn't have a lot of resources for my high school. And so that just led me into my work now with TRIO. It definitely led me to supporting students who are just like me, and supporting students who come from marginalized backgrounds, low income, disabilities. And so that definitely led me into the work of what I'm doing now, supporting students. Like, I want to be their cheerleader, just like my mother was a cheerleader to me throughout my years, and the support that I received at WKU. And so that just led me to the work that I'm doing today, and also the work that I do through KBHE. Just through my racial experiences, just making sure that we bring awareness within higher education and just bringing change within the arena, especially here in Kentucky. And so that is just kind of my short background experience to where I'm at today.
Thank you, Ashaya. We appreciate you sharing those personal experiences with us. I know that can often be tough. Thank you. Ms. Miller, Jamaica?
Yes.
Would you mind to share with us a little bit about your experiences here as a student at HCTC? And Jamaica is one of our HCTC student ambassadors, and she can kind of talk a little bit about what they do. And also, I first met Jamaica when she was at Buckhorn High School, because she was part of our Multicultural Leadership Council that we have with high school students. So if you could speak a little bit about that and your experiences.
Okay, so obviously I am the youngest, so I have not had as many experiences as most people. But growing up, whenever I first moved to Buckhorn, me and my younger brother and sister were the only African Americans within that town. I went into school, and there wasn't a whole lot of racism whenever I first started. Yes, I got looks and stares and everything because my brother and sister were not in school yet. So that made me the only African American in that school. So whenever I got into about middle school is whenever I really started noticing racism. And I had girls tell me that I was ugly because of the color of my skin. I had racial slurs thrown at me in grade school. And I mean, at such a young age, those people that were saying, racial slurs towards me had no idea what those things meant. That's kind of how I feel that racism is a learned behavior, because they don't know what those things mean. So they've obviously heard them from someone else. Whenever I got into high school, there was a little bit more diversity. There was more African Americans at my school. Not a whole lot, not very many, maybe 4 or 5. So I was always told by some of my teachers and some of the staff members at my school that maybe they didn't come right out and say it, but basically told me that I was never going to make it in life. They treated me as if I was dumb and was not as smart as the other students. that really took a toll on me. I did not want to go to school for the longest time. I had perfect attendance all throughout grade school and high school, but it really started to put pressure on me and made me realize that racism is a thing. It is a big deal. And I didn't really notice it as much in grade school, but then middle school and high school, it got progressively worse. I am now a first-year student at HCTC. I am also the student ambassador. Becoming a student ambassador has really helped me a whole lot in life because it makes me realize that I do have a chance, and I'm not as I'm smarter than what people preceded me as. With being a student ambassador, obviously we've done quite a few things so far. We've been taking items to flood victims and things like that and gathering items. And I really love the opportunity to give back to my community because that makes me feel better about myself and about the things that I do personally. I was in pageants a few years ago, and I was actually the very first African American Miss Kentucky in 2019, which was a huge opportunity for me because it was 2019 and there had never been an African American within that system. So going up and actually winning made me feel amazing because I get to have the experience to be the very first African American Miss Kentucky 2019, and that was such a great opportunity for me as well. Like Dr. Linden said, I was a part of the multicultural leadership program at Buckhorn, and I really loved having someone come in and basically tell me that it is okay to be different. It is okay to not worry about what other people say and about the racism that people perceive to you, that it is okay to be who you are and to love yourself. And I really look forward to giving the opportunity to African Americans and all different other cultures coming up from generations behind me. And I really want to show them that it is okay to be different and that you will make it in the world no matter what people tell you.
Thank you, Jamaica. Well said. It's okay to be yourself and to love yourself. So I'm hearing common themes in everyone's stories. Community involvement, chances, opportunities, family support, education. All of these things are so important for all of us to be successful in life. We do have some questions, and I'm going to kind of move into the question section. And some of these have been submitted from our Equity and Inclusion Council at HCTC. And so I'll kind of go through those. Some of those we've kind of already touched on, and then we'll open it up. But I guess I'll throw this out to whoever wants to answer it. Could you tell us, we've talked about many different topics, and we've kind of touched on racism a bit, but could someone tell us how they see the difference between equity and equality? What's the difference in equity and equality? Does anyone want to take that one?
I have a graphic here that's actually on the front of one of my books that I think would give us a way of thinking about the difference between the two. I'll share it. I don't know if you can see that or not, right?
I can see it.
So equality is basically saying that everybody's equal. We start with a base of everybody being equal. And with that, you can see that first of all, it's a utopian idea. There's no really such thing. But if you do that, people are going to be left behind. And you hear people talk about all the time that I'm fair, I don't see color, I don't do a variety of other things, right? And so the importance of, and hopefully I don't click us off here, is trying to get out of here. I may actually have to get help. But so what I want to say is I think it's important that we actually talk about nomenclature. I have to get some help here. That still didn't happen, but we're good, I think. Can you see me again?
I
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah, good. So I want to do some nomenclature that's very important for us to have. When we talk about DEI, and we talk about DEI all the time, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we talk about racism, and we talk about anti-racism, and I think it's important that we get on the same page. I'm a sociologist, as most of you know, and this was an area of study and always have been for me. But this is where I see all of us getting in trouble, no matter where we're coming from in this discussion. And I'll put it in the context of education and higher education in specific. When we think of diversity, that's an aspect of a population. It's an aspect of who we are as far as race, ethnicity, gender, social orientation, sexual orientation, the way we think, in a variety of ways, our abilities. That's diversity. So it's an aspect of the population. Inclusion is how we bring those folks in. And even though I haven't won a beauty pageant in Jamaica, I just want to let you know that I'm a great dancer, is what I tell people. And that's probably not true. But if you think about having a dance and you invite all different kinds of people to your dance, all the aspects of the population, that's great. And that's what we've concentrated on for years. After affirmative action, I'd say we went to diversity. Out of the civil rights movement, went to affirmative action. And I love these stories. And I have one of these days, a lot more to share with you about my story growing up in racism, which was an interesting conversation in itself. But if you have a dance, you invite all kinds of people. But we've got to move to inclusion too. We've left people out of that dance. So in this dance, we're asking people to get engaged, involved. And that's what we had to do in higher education to close some of the gaps we're now closing. We not needed to just recruit people of color or low income people into our walls. We needed to actually help them to get engaged. So inclusion is asking everybody to dance. Equity, which is truly a matter of assessment and how we do our inputs and know how well we're doing it, is giving everybody an opportunity. PG, I like where you were at on that opportunity and access. Giving everybody access and opportunity to dance. PG needs to be as good as I am dancing, right? But he may take a little more help. So equity is about the inputs. Equity is about knowing where we're at, doing what we need to do to ensure that everybody has an opportunity that would have not necessarily a leg up, but being able to have the same baseline to get where we need to go. We know, for an example, when kids go into kindergarten, whether you're black or white, they're about the same in preparation. By the time third grade happens, our kids of color are actually down. And this keeps on going. And so equity is about understanding exactly what's causing that and giving the kind of inputs that it takes to ensure that they all have the opportunity for success. And that's an important piece for us to think about in all of our organizations. How well are we providing the inputs and measuring how well we're doing it? We're calling that cultural competence in this state. How well we're measuring those inputs to know that it's having the effect that we need to have in a positive direction that we need to go. And if it doesn't, how quickly we can change those inputs to ensure that we are doing that. We no longer can sit on our laurels and say, well, we have X percent of Black people or Latinx people in our institutions. We need to be saying, how well are they learning and getting a quality education and graduating at similar rates as everybody else. And those rates shouldn't be that we're bringing everybody to a squeeze effect. In other words, bring other people down to get equity or equality. It means that we are actually lifting everybody up to the top standard that's needed in this state that provides an equitable opportunity for everybody to participate in the criminal justice system, everybody to participate in the educational system, everybody to participate at a level of getting the most positive. When we're seeing the disparities, and I know it's one of the questions, so I won't go into it now, but when we're looking at the disparities, what we're really saying is that someone has been denied the equal opportunity to have the positive effects. And when you're denied those equal opportunities, what you're having to do now is create an equitable process to put those opportunities back. And so that's the difference between equity and equality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. You can see why we are so proud to have him at the helm of higher education in the state of Kentucky. Would any other panelists like to add anything additional to that?
I would like to say this. I agree with every word you said, Dr. Thompson. And the visual that you put up, I was looking at that same visual last night, and it speaks volumes in helping to explain things. Thinking about equality, one of the things that has been resonating over and over in my mind for some time now is what it says in the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with a certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And, one of the words that pops out is truth. And created equal. And the thing that comes to mind is we can have laws written and that will address equality and equity. And what I am seeing is the change really comes when there's a change in that person's heart. So that's when the laws and so forth is taken off the books and placed in our hearts. That has to be a heart change in people also. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you, Emily. You talked about the laws and the legislative process, but really the change is in people's hearts, and I really agree with that. That kind of goes into the next question that was submitted, which is, have you seen positive changes regarding racism in your lifetime? Does anyone want to take that one? Mr. Peoples or Emily?
Let me say, one of the ways I've always answered that question is it's like a cha-cha dance, 3 steps forward, 2 back. Things change, and then things get off track, and we go backwards. So I've been around enough to see so many of those go forward, go back, that it's kind of hard to measure whether you're really making progress. But one of the things that I've always learned from that, and I still feel, is we must persist. We must continue to have hope, and we must continue to work with expectations of making progress. If we look at decades, Aaron spoke of those decades of the civil rights movement. I think we made tremendous progress. Then we went through periods where people did all they could to eradicate the changes that we gained in civil rights. Over the in all due respect, this is intended to not offend anybody's politics, but I think the last 4 years has been detrimental in terms of progress. It has brought us, as I used to hear Lyman Johnson say, our wagon has rolled back down the hill. And that was intentional. Let me give you one example of one of the things that concerns me right now in terms of progress. This government, not the present administration, but there are some congressional people and governors all over this state who are hell bent on initiating voter suppression. And because if they can suppress the vote, they can retard the growth and retard the where we get more African Americans and women and Hispanics into positions. So I guess my answer is yes and no.
I want to add something to what PG said. I think it's important that you heard his last piece, that it's yes and no. First of all, I'm not saying this is the wrong question. I'm just saying we need to ask it differently. Have we made progress in relative comparison to the other progress that's made around us? That's the right question. If you look at it purely as a mutually exclusive item, have we made progress since the 60s? When we, as an example to now, then the answer is yes, of course. I'm the head of higher education for Kentucky. Can you imagine a black man doing that in 1960s? Probably not. But that's not the right question. Well, it's a good question, but it's not the total question, is a better way of putting it. We still have African Americans, as an example, disproportionately represented in our criminal justice system. We have them disproportionately represented in our economic system. We have them disproportionately represented in, I keep on going forever, in the economy. In our political system even. So the idea, I remember seeing my mama and daddy vote for the first time in 1968. And I remember someone trying to buy their vote at that time. This is after being disenfranchised from that vote for a long time. So if we still dealing with voter suppression, that answers a part of that question that PG was going to there. And I think that's important. It's also important that we understand, and I want to go with Emily's statement a little bit, it is a change of heart, but you can't change attitudes and hearts. And we know this as a sociologist, I promise you. You just can't ask people to change their hearts because they probably don't know how, because the culture is embedded with a system that's been in place for a long time. The only way you can change it is have behavioral change. The way you do that is change laws, change policies. And then after generations, hopefully, maybe no more than one, you can see attitudinal or heart change. So there is a process of understanding this question that we all need to be focused on. One is, it's not as simple as saying, have we made progress? The answer is yes, but you may see that report I just released 3 or 4 days ago on the salaries of women compared to men in Kentucky. You can argue that women made progress, but did you see that report? So all of this is relative compared to exactly where we're at in our society. My argument is simply this. In a civilized society, if we're still having this conversation at the level we are, if we still see what we dealt with last year with Black Lives Matter that we're still dealing with, if we see what happened at the Capitol, if we see all of those things, you could make an argument that in some cases we've slipped. But the argument is clearly one that is more dynamic. That's why I like that's why I show up as much as I can to these sorts of discussions, because that dynamism should be what we're talking about. And that measurement at the most microscopic level to say, where do we need to go from the baseline we're dealing with on all of these issues, and not just one big old pot, you know, it is important to this conversation and to this question. I could go on forever, and I apologize for that long answer, but it is an important way in my mind that we need to be discussing this.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Very good, Aaron. That's very good, and I do hope eventually, and I deal with this with the media and all, that we get away from the comprehensive question, because the comprehensive question is really hard to answer in a yes or no.
Thank you so much. I do see a few hands up. I will ask you if you could hold your thought until the end. We are going to take questions from our panel guests, not our panelists, but our panel guests at the end. So we've got a few questions from our equity and inclusion panel we're going to get through, and then we'll certainly take your questions, and you'll have the option to put that in the chat. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add about experiences in Eastern Kentucky? That was a question, but I think many of you already spoke about that. So I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add, but I will throw that out there in case there is. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one then. Since many of us are in education who are here on this call, of course we'd like to know what books you've read or what resources you might want to suggest, things that might assist someone with their attitude with surrounding racism, or maybe something that might help change someone's behavior. Or just a good book on equity, inclusion, and diversity. Is there anything you would recommend?
Other than my books, yes, I would. I'm joking. You know, this is an area where we need to really focus on. I don't know if you read the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi. If you haven't, that's a good one. Or White Fragility, or The New Jim Crow, or How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming. You know, these are all, I think, books to get us thinking. But I also, Dr. Linden, you know what I feel about this, so I won't pull any punches here. This is not just about us reading a book and thinking it's good. We need to actually operationalize these books and everything else into the fabric of our institutions. In other words, we need to have college curriculum and high school curriculum that focuses on this, because it is a cultural change. And I know you're going to ask us about that in a minute, and I'll hold off answering that. But books need to teach us something, and we need to have dialogue with that book. In other words, we need to have self-reflection, self-actualization, and we need to be challenging ourselves to say, how do we see ourselves in that book? As well as that book needs to be challenging us to maybe rewrite a new edition. So a part of what I would argue is any of these books are great, but how do we interact with that, and how do we fill the fabric of our institutions? How do we help professors, and I'm one of them, so I can point myself this way. How do we help professors to know the pedagogy of the other? How do we move from a teaching paradigm to a learner's paradigm, and listening to the stories that folks have to tell us, like Miss Robinson or Miss Miller or Mr. Peoples or Miss Hudson? How do we do that? So a part of reading is more than just listening to the enlightenment of someone who wrote it, but it's listening to the enlightenment of what it tells us and how we see ourselves in it.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have a resource they'd like to share? I do want to mention, if you have not seen Dr. Thompson's Higher Equity series, it is wonderful. You can go on YouTube and find all of the webinars, and They are very educational and informative. So I do want to recommend those, and not just because he's on the panel. I have watched them all. They are very good, whether you're in education or not.
With your permission, could I make a quick Urban League promotion? Book I'm holding up here is the Urban League's 50th anniversary commemorative book that's just come off the press in November. They're accessible through the Urban League, and there's a lot of history here about our involvement and some of our accomplishments. What's most interesting when you get this and look at it is it starts in '68 with marches downtown Lexington, and it ends with with what marches downtown last year. That we've gone full circle. How far things have changed and how much they remain the same. But I would just say that I would just offer that up as a history of the Urban League, because we do think that we have a pretty rich history and have made some contributions.
I would
Thank you,
like
sir.
to add as
Eugene, I
well.
just want to say I got mine with me.
Okay, thank you, buddy.
I would like to add as well for the resources. I just want to give a big shout out to Berea College for this resource for sure. So Berea College definitely take the initiative to take faculty and staff as well as students on civil rights tours. And I'm a huge visual learner. And so I was able to attend in 2017 and 2019 on a civil rights tour. And I think this is an easy way, especially if there's any programming events of taking students or even personally your family, taking family vacation. I think it's even on us as educators, if you're in the education field, or just in general, like we're learning this knowledge now to really just take our families and visit sites, visit civil rights museums. And so some of the resources that I just have that I was able to visit throughout the civil rights tour was the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama as well, the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum that's in Jackson, Mississippi, Fort Sumter that's in Charleston, South Carolina. Of course, a lot of people have visited the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia, but the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama. And so these are just a few, just to name. There's so many out there, but I know people are so quick to take your family to on beaches and stuff. But what about actually educating our own family members and taking them to these sites and educating them and learning more about racism, civil rights, and having a visual experience, because I know that helped me a lot to put what I was reading into the actual locations of these places that it took place, or just learning more in a museum.
Thank you so much. I know that we've had several students who were able to participate in the civil rights tours with Berea College, and they all had amazing experiences. I do want to give a shameless plug for our resource page, our HCTC resource page. It's on the Equity and Inclusion webpage. If you go to the HCTC homepage, you can search for Equity and Inclusion. You'll find that webpage. And Daryl Parker, I see him on this call. Thank you to Daryl Parker for putting together that resource page for us. We appreciate that. He is their social media student liaison, and he's done a wonderful job putting all of those webinars and so forth together on one page for us. So it's a quick resource for anyone who wants to learn more. Thank you. So the next question that I want to pose, and I think we've kind of spoken about it a little bit, but it's the title of our panel today. Do you believe that racism can be unlearned? And if so, how can it be unlearned? So if racism is a learned behavior, then can it be unlearned? And if so, do you have any suggestions on how? Not sure who wants to take that one first.
I'll speak a little bit about this one. I believe that racism is a learned behavior because growing up, like I said earlier, those children did not know what they were saying, so obviously they've learned it from somewhere. I think that racism can be unlearned by teaching the upcoming generation that it is okay to be different. It is okay to be of a different race, and to teach them not to make fun or put down other people because of their race. And I feel that, um, you know, this is something that can be unlearned. I've had people come up to me like after grade school and into high school. I had people that made fun of me in grade school come up to me and, talk to me a little bit and apologize for the things that they said whenever they were younger, because they did not realize what they were saying at the time. But once they realized what they were saying, I have had two people specifically come to me and apologize for things that they've said whenever they were younger. And that actually really helped me throughout high school to know that these people is learned, but they can unlearn it. They knew, like, they didn't know what they were saying, but now they do know what they were saying, and it made them feel bad for me because of what they said when they didn't know what they were talking about. So I think it's really important to educate the upcoming generation. This is really how the racism is going to stop, by the people that are coming up from this next generation and so on. Because teaching them that racism is not okay is going to get rid of the racism coming in. And that's really where it needs to stop.
I'd like to just weigh in on that one if it's okay. Hello?
Yes, please.
Dr. Thompson, what I'm going to comment on here that is not, there's not a darn thing scientific about it. It's a nominal sampling, but it's an experience that I've had over the years. And it's that the number of grandparents of biracial kids who have changed their attitudes about race as a result of the biracial babies entering the family. It's hard to hate and love at the same time.
Well, PG will take the steam out of what I just got getting ready to say because he's right. I mean, because I'll just go with the scientific definition now, PG. Thank you for taking that one away from me. But if you think of racism, racism means that it's a belief. So the answer is then just what racism is. It's a belief that one race is better than the other. But it's also the second part that you have the power as a group to show it. So it's not just the belief, there is a power element to it. There is a direct force element to that process. And the force we've had in that process has happened in our culture. And that's where we start this conversation at. When you think of what's happened in America between 1619 and 1690, we created slavery with a population that was of African ancestry. And we had to convince a puritanical group of people who did not believe in slavery, who believed in freedom, to say that it's okay to enslave people. And it took that long to become a part of the culture. It just didn't happen in 1619 with those indentured servants that turned into slaves. It just didn't happen then. It happened over a period of time. So the argument, can you unlearn it? Yes, and you can do it in 4 ways. I'll tell you fast. Is first of all, create a systematic way of addressing it. You have to. You have to be transparent about it, and you have to come up with a systematic way of addressing it. Number two, we have to incorporate in the culture, because what I'm telling you here is history. What did James Baldwin say? If you don't know what happened behind you, you'll have no idea what's happening around you. So it talks about we have to understand history from a truth viewpoint, and we have to teach it, and we have to lay it out, and we have to, that's a part of the transparency that we have to have within education, and that is where we're going to have our best opportunities to unlearn it, because it is a learned behavior. Number three, we have to, though, intentionally address laws or those things on the book that by nature is racist. And I think that is an important conversation to have. How do we address that? And how do we combat that? And number four, and I think this is really important, this is going to take a multiracial way of doing it. And that can be done in many ways. Biracial children is an example. But it's also exactly what made the civil rights movement successful. You had to bring all kinds of different people of different religions, different backgrounds, and we're saying the same language. We have to get on the same page. How do we do this? We build communities around this conversation. PG mentions families. We build communities around this conversation. We build in our schools, whether it's higher ed or P12, communities around this. We hire for this. We hire people of color and other folks to give a different perspective. We are taught to respect that we learn more from people different from us than people like us, like Jamaica was saying, that we can learn from others no matter where they're coming from. We've got to figure out how then we instill in each individual child the ability to have power within themselves, no matter how they look or how they think. So in other words, we have to create agency. And that's what education should be creating, is agency in a child, to where he or she will know how to reach out and grab success no matter what has happened. One of the things I'll throw in here, the African American community in this country has been one of resilience. During slavery, after slavery, including now, one of resilience. And if you're one of resilience, that tells you a story too. So how do we incorporate a resilient process in that systematic way of actually getting rid of racism? And part of what we're doing now is that we're telling the stories. But we're, once again, not just telling stories for stories itself, but one that actually has something to tell others that they can get something from in order to create their own stories.
Powerful words.
To add on to both Dr. Thompson and PG, I would also say that racism can definitely be unlearned, but it's always going to be a process, because we have to understand the root. Just like Dr. Thompson kind of mentioned, that the root of racism is caused division, and is about power. And so we really have to, debunk this by education, and not only education, but the act of just showing love. And I don't want to go too much into the education, because I think Dr. Thompson did a wonderful job, because it's very systematic. Racism is a system. And so I just want to just highlight about love, knowing how to love one another. And that just comes of learning the difference between empathy and sympathy. And so a lot of us just try to have sympathy for one another, which is just sharing, our feelings, but we do not take the time to empathize with one another. And that's simply listening and connecting with each other's feelings and showing love to one another. And I don't think that we do that enough. We always want to compare, my story versus your story, and my pain is greater than your pain. So I'm not going to sit here and listen to you, because the white struggle is just as much as the black struggle. And so we're still having division within that and not truly learning how to empathize with one another. And so I just want to add that factor on to what Dr. Thompson and what PG had also said, because they had really great points. And so I don't want to go too much into those, but I really think learning the ability to empathize and showing love to one another will also help us to really gather that community and become on one accord with one another to fight this system of racism.
Would any of our other panelists like to speak? Well, thank you all. Those were powerful words, and I really appreciated the comment about empathy versus sympathy. I definitely agree with that. We all need to show more empathy. And Dr. Thompson, you gave us the 4 steps right there. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you've heard the theme throughout about education. And, you know, at HCTC, we are very proud of the diversity that we have. You know, in a classroom, you can have people of color, you can have people of all age groups, and everyone learns from each other. But that's why we have these conversations. We have to learn from each other. We have to have conversations that invoke critical thought, and we have to have conversations that will invoke thought that will result in change. And that is our purpose, that is our responsibility as educational institutions. So I'm pleased that we've been able to have this panel today. I think we are ready to open it up. I think we're going to open up the chat for any questions that we have from our guests. And we have Donna Roark, our Chief Information Officer, and she's going to help me kind of sort through and field these questions, and so that we can keep up. I know I saw a few hands, so I hope that you'll put those in the chat. So we'll give you all just a minute.
Comment while you're moving to that.
Please.
I just wanted to make a quick comment to Jamaica. You hear me?
Yes.
Early on, I made a note of something when you said that you went through a period where you were having some difficulties because you were beginning to allow people to make you think that you're not as smart as you really are because of their perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I want to say to you, congratulations for not allowing that to stick with you.
Thank you.
And then I attached to that what you said earlier also about rising to become what, Miss Kentucky 2019.
Yes.
That's quite a leap from self-doubt
Mm-hmm.
to becoming Miss Kentucky 2019.
Yeah.
And I'll just share with you one of my philosophies with all of my adult life has been, I am my biggest cheerleader.
Yes.
So I don't need anybody to affirm PG people. Yeah, I do that every day.
Yes.
And I do that in a way by trying to help other people. So, young lady, congratulations to you for not allowing that to stick to you, because there's so many young African Americans have gone through those kind of situations, and it sticks and becomes detrimental. I remember when we integrated, they had a exercise that they went through where they would make predictions about what your future looked like, what your future is going to be. I bear in mind we just integrated. This is our first year together, and this information came out that someone had predicted that I was going to be and all due respect to the occupation, but that I was going to be a shoe salesman. First thing I said, you don't know me well enough to know know that kind of thing about me. So mind your business. But what I'm saying to you is I am so glad you didn't allow those kind of things to stick to you, because I've seen us lose so many of our young people who have bought into that. So you keep pushing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Jamaica, you're getting other accolades and words of support in the chat from some of your former professors here at HCTC. So we do have several questions coming through, and I'm going to see if I can read this with my one contact here. What advice would you give an African American professor or professional, from Eastern Kentucky who wants to stay in the region and navigate up in professional leadership? So you have an African American professional in Eastern Kentucky. What would you suggest to them to stay in the region and be able to navigate up in professional leadership?
That's a great question. I'll give you my answer based on my background. I was blessed enough to be educated in Eastern Kentucky and educated at a Kentucky university, and two Kentucky universities, as a matter of fact. And when I got my PhD, now a long time ago, I had pretty good offers, and I won't tell you where, but you may be surprised. And the offer that I took was to be a professor at Eastern Kentucky University. I did that because that was me. I so appreciate what Peachy just said too, that I can be my own cheerleader, but I can also be my own person that if I talk to myself in a certain way, I'll convince myself I'm not where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so what I decided to do was fight. Let me tell you, it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard being in a culture where you're the only one.
Yeah, it is.
I've been the only one so many times I could write you 3 books about being the only one. So I decided, but since I'm the only one, I'm really going to have to represent. And people still say to me, Dr. Thompson, aren't you just like tired of just like carrying everybody on your back? Aren't you just tired of being the representative person? Aren't you tired? And I say, yes, I am. I'm very tired. I'm exhausted, as a matter of fact. So thank God, God gave me a heck of a back to still carry people. That's the role you have to take, is that you've been put here then for a reason. And my argument is build that reason to become everything you could possibly ever become. And it's not about where you're at. It's about whether or not you're supposed to be there. And that's the hard thing to deal with. That self-actualization is hard because we have this self-talking. And I know people of color and low income people have it probably more than other folks. This doubt about whether or not I'm supposed to be successful or not. I will not tell you how many times I've had people tell me what I wasn't going to be. But you know what? I learned more from people being negative than from people being positive because I've had this attitude forever. Okay, if you tell me what I'm not going to be, I'll come talk to you one of these days because you'll invite me. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is about knowing where you belong. And if you know you belong there, then you'll figure it out. I'm not going to lie to you. It takes good perception. It takes political astuteness because you can't be stupid. And I tell people don't like to use that word, but you can't be stupid. You have to know more in many cases, more than everybody around you. And that way you can maneuver the process more because the process was never really designed fully for you. So your opportunity as the only one is to design the process for people to come after you. And that's an important piece of leadership. And that's the role you've been put in if you're the only one. So how then do you maneuver that to help everybody, not just other Black folk, but even people that can learn from who you are and what you've done, no matter what color they are, and see you truly as a mentor to help them to get where they need to go.
And let me add that I applaud you for for wanting to stay and give back to Eastern Kentucky. I think Aaron indicated you've been. Some of us are in places by was predestined. So look at it that way. Stay there, help, give back. One of my dearest friends from Eastern Kentucky, professional, asked last year, Carolyn Sunday. Carolyn Sunday stayed in Harlan County and gave and gave and gave and gave. But there are so many people who came out of Harlan County who've done well as a result of what her staying there. So that's probably that could be your predestination. And also remember that there are people like myself, like Aaron and others out there. Reach out to us. There at times when you might feel you need a little boost, or not wait until you need a boost, but reach out to us. We can be mentors. I applaud you, and I'm glad that you're willing to do that. And is it tough? Will it be tough? Absolutely. But what I fall back on when things get really tough for me is I think about my forebears and what they had to go through. And then I get up, dust myself off, and keep going.
Thank you so much. And that question came to us from Tony. And next we have a question from Jenny Williams. And her question is, how can we make sure our institutions are really working for change and not just checking off boxes on a diversity and inclusion report? What can each of us do as faculty, administration, staff, and students? It's a big question.
I hate to be the first one to answer all the time, but if you're in higher education in this state, you have to live up to a policy that I designed. So I'll answer it from that viewpoint and just tell you this. First of all, if you have the conversation, even if it's around checking off the boxes, I won't be too mad at you. But we're going one step farther. We have gone to say, as President Linden can tell you, we've gone, and Hazard, by the way, really showed up last year in their report here. I will give you a compliment. We're saying you just can't talk about, we have X amount of people on our campus that is of color. We're asking you now, what are you doing with them? We're asking you, what kind of wraparound services are you giving them? What kind of cultural experiences are you bringing to your campus, period, that everybody can learn from? We're asking you, what are you doing to close the gaps? And we're measuring you on that. So we're doing two things that are important. We're asking you, what are you doing pedagogically to help your professors to know how to teach everybody? We're asking you, what are you doing curricularly to make sure that the thread is there in your system that people can learn from to change attitudes or hearts? We're also asking you, are you closing gaps? So we took it one step farther. It's okay to say we've done this. If your gaps are widening, we need to be asking the question why. So we've moved from a diversity sort of policy to a diversity, inclusion, equity, and cultural competence. So we're going to measure you at every level. We also did another thing in Kentucky. We call it the squeeze effect. We've set our performance funding system up around equity. We have two parts of our performance funding system that focuses on low income and that focuses on how well you're doing with underrepresented minorities. And if you do really well, you get paid more. That's just the way it works. But also the other squeeze is around our diversity inclusion policy. We're saying that we want to help you and work with you to create a developmental way of building your campus to be open for anyone that wants to come to it and will not feel as if they are having an immigrant experience on it. But we're also saying that if you don't live up to the plan that we agree on, you don't get new programs. So there's some punitive effects there, but we don't work on the punitive piece. We work on the proactive strategic piece, how we can help you to build that. So the only way I know how to answer your question fully is that we've got to get it in the threads, and in the threads of a college campus will be your curriculum and will be your faculty and staff development, period. And then how you bring people in it. And then how students interact with all of that in an engaged way that they feel important. And so this is changing from a teaching philosophy or paradigm to a learner's paradigm. Are your students getting what they thought they would be getting, or are they feeling isolated based on their background or any other element? So that's the relationship that we have in my office with all of public higher ed in the state of Kentucky.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And I do want to mention that Professor Williams, who asked that question, is one of our very strong advocates at HCTC for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she works together with Danielle King, our Director of Cultural Diversity, and others on our Equity and Inclusion Council to really make sure that we are doing all we can to provide opportunity and access for all students who walk in our doors. So we have another question, and we've kind of spoken about this just a little bit, but I do want to go ahead and read this one. And this is coming from Jennifer Dugan. And she is saying, greetings from UPike. Glad to see someone on here from UPike. Greetings, Jennifer. We have just launched our first ever search for a diversity director. Our focus is on student success. While we are excited about the search, we also understand that it's everyone's work. How can we be sure to integrate and share the leadership and help our new hires stay and succeed? Does anyone want to take that one or add to some of what we've already kind of stated? I'm hearing Mr. Peoples and Dr. Thompson, and I'm sure Emily and Ashaya would and Jamaica too would also be willing to serve as mentors and help for whoever the new person is coming in.
Well, I'll just throw this one in there, and once again, I'll base it on research. I won't base it on my life story, even though that was good research for me. This is what we know. If you're going to hire someone to come in to that role, there's several things you need to do. They need to have some power in that role to be able to suggest policy change. It needs not just to be someone coming in to do activities. That's number one. Number two, if that person happens to be someone of color or some other social orientation diversity, what they know is as important as salary, they also want leadership opportunities. So you need to somehow provide them with a way to grow, whether it's horizontally or vertically. And number three, and I think this is important, you want to be able to help that person feel like they're not on an island by themselves, that they are just there to say, we got somebody there. You know, they need to be in a position whereby that they have leadership to back them up. They have faculty interaction, staff interaction, student interaction, all to create a dynamism on your campus that would make anyone want to come. And it's your job, if that person then happens to be of color, is to surround them in the community with people that can support them. And that's President Lyndon offered us up. I offer me up again to that. And give them resources, not just monetary resources, but give them resources of your time, give them resources of your knowledge. And it just doesn't have to be talking about whether or not about that subject, because they need to grow as a person, not just the job they represent. So give them the resources of leadership, resources of community engagement and mentorship. So that's what I would offer.
I would just say total, total. Am I still on? Can you hear me? Total top-down support.
Thank you all. Any other comments from the panelists?
I would also add as well, with community, to be transparent with that individual. I know my last job as a case manager, I had to travel into rural areas, and one of those was Tompkinsville, Kentucky. And I was so grateful to have my supervisor. I mean, she was very, very, very transparent. She said, I know that, this rural area could be, you could experience racism. And so if there's any support, you can let me know if you experience anything. And I knew that she would have my back, that she supported me. She was transparent from the jump, that this is happening, or this could happen to you. So I just want you to be aware when you're entering into this community. And so I think transparency will go a long way as well in bridging that community, finding that community for that individual, not only on campus, but also within the community of the town.
Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson. So I'm going to kind of combine these next two questions because they're very similar. So forgive me, I'm going to read for just a minute. But this is coming as a question from Tawny Smith at Big Sandy, and also on the side it says stewardship is the next question. So I'm going to try to combine them both because I think they're sort of tied in together. So first is a thank you. A thank you to all of you so much for sharing your stories and educating us. And the question is, how can allies be better allies in terms of professional and personal atmospheres to avoid a white savior line being crossed? And it goes into the next question, which is, how can white people leverage their white privilege for minorities in a way that doesn't come across as stepping into a world that isn't ours or fighting for something we don't know about from personal experience? So I tied those in, but I thought they were sort of related, but a big question there.
First of all, I think allyship should, for me, that means partnership. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Sometimes people think that this issue is all belonging to black folk. You cannot get rid of racism unless in America without white folk being partners with us. So allyship for me is that we're all in this boat together. So we need to be fighting equally as hard. And in order to fight equally as hard, we need to go through a 4-stage process that I promise you, President Linden, that I do a whole day workshop on this. I'm just going to do it in about 1 minute. And it goes to actually what Ms. Robinson was saying earlier. The first stage is, if you're going to be a full ally or a full partner, you need to go through your own self-evaluation process. What do you believe about this subject? And what do you know about this subject? So you go through a process, and it's okay if you don't know. If you come up with a conclusion, I just don't know as much, then that relies on you and those around you to help you to know more. I call this building your IQ phase, or it's your awareness phase. And you can't get to a full allyship unless you, first of all, go through a self-actualization, self-evaluation, self-assessment, and figure out what you don't know, and then grow your knowledge. That's awareness. That leads to acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is saying, whatever you believe, it will have an effect on those that you serve, or in this case, this person you want to be an ally to. Whatever you believe will have an effect on that person, either positive or negative, or on that group that person represents. This acknowledgement is what we call social intelligence. And you can't get to social intelligence unless you, first of all, build your knowledge base. The third leads to acceptance. And I tell people, you are what you eat. If you're an ally or a partner, you are what you eat. You're going to have to actually look at that person you're working with, learn as much about that person as you possibly can, but then see yourself in that person. Connect with, it doesn't have to be exactly the same story, but it can be a similar output from their story that you can connect with. We call this empathy. But bottom line, acceptance is about emotional intelligence, which is the highest form of intelligence, by the way. But you can't get there unless you, first of all, have social intelligence, and you can't get social intelligence unless you build your knowledge base or your IQ. And the last A on this is action. Action is more, in other words, you have to do more than talk. You have to do more than just say, I'm here for you. You have to set up a strategic process to allow yourself to constantly be self-evaluated, constantly be accused of actually not knowing what you're talking about. First of all, as a Black person, I want you as my ally if you're a white person. I accept that you may not know everything, but I also accept I don't know everything. To ever assume that Black folk know about Black history is a bad assumption. To ever assume it's our responsibility, period, to educate you is also a bad assumption. It is our responsibility together as allies or partners to build this boat that we're both in together and also make it sail like the best boat ever made. This is the way we have to think about building partnerships or allyships. It's a hard task simply because we're dealing with hundreds of years of a culture that has told us not to do this. So this is going to be very purposeful. That's why you need that last A. But you also need to make sure that that person you're working with can go through these 4 A's with you, because that is what allyship is.
I have a couple of comments there. And I guess by now you guys realize that practically everything I brought to you today has been just from personal experiences, because I've been doing this now for 52 years. Partnership, I've always believed in having those across racial lines. And oftentimes it's been helpful, because there have been situations where we've had to do the good cop, bad cop, white guy, black guy thing. Okay, going into the meeting, something needed to be said, but it could be more effectively said by the white guy than by me. That's a partnership, and that we both understood and recognized and respected each other's strengths. Partnerships recognize and respect each other's strengths.
Thank you. I'm taking notes. Any other comments from our panelists on how allies can be better allies?
I think that Dr. Thompson and PG just said that so well, spoke it all. And it is true. We've got to get everyone on board working together. And as I was listening to that, I really do think that this is beginning to take place in our community. I've seen people of different backgrounds, different races, and so forth coming together to work on the issues. And so I feel positive about that taking place.
So it's so encouraging to hear that from you, because that says that you are seeing some successes. And I've learned success breeds success. So you stay the course.
I'm looking over in the chat. I'm going to embarrass Jamaica for just a minute, because your mother's giving you a shout out, and she's very proud of you. And she also has a suggestion for us on another good resource. She said there is a book called Black and White Styles in Conflict by Thomas Coachman, which is one that we should check out. So you all may want to jot that one down. It's in the chat. Also, I'm just reading through, trying to see if there's any other questions. I do see lots of thank yous. Everyone has learned so much, and I know I certainly have learned today, and I appreciate all of you. Discussion about Dr. Sunday, and Dr. Sunday and I go way back as well, and it was a great loss to lose her. I actually worked on my PhD at the same time that Dr. Sunday was working on hers, so we were in a cohort class together through Mississippi State, and we spent many weekends together in Middlesboro, Kentucky. And she was just wonderful for that institution.
when you mentioned Mississippi State and your PhD, she came to mind because I knew she matriculated through that process.
Yes. I see people who are hoping to attend some of Mr. Thompson's, Dr. Thompson's seminars. Do we have any other questions? It looks like our questions are winding down. I want to make sure we have a few more minutes if anyone else has anything.
First of all, I just want to say, since everybody's calling out Carolyn and I go back, God, I don't even know how many decades, but Carolyn was the only person, I just give personal point of privilege here. I could be the busiest man in the world. Carolyn always figured out a way to get me up in Eastern Kentucky to speak. She would figure it out, and because she knew how to really give you this very intellectual, drawn out country drawl, and and in such a way, by the time you did it, you felt like not only did you have to do what she wanted you to do, you were in love with her while you did it. You know, that was how powerful Carolyn was, and what a great educator, period, but what a great educator for our neck of the woods, and just a wonderful role model to so many people. And I know will miss her deeply, but Carolyn was not just engaged up in the hills; she was engaged throughout Kentucky and throughout the other states. So I appreciate y'all giving a call out to Carolyn.
Yes. Well, we just want to say, and on behalf of HCTC, I want to say that we are so appreciative of our panelists today. I can tell by the comments in the chat that everyone has learned as much as I have, and I hope that this will be the first of many panels that we'll be able to have that are open for the community. This has been recorded, and we will put it on a resources page and in other locations on our web page, so that we can have anyone who wants to learn more log on and click on and watch this, because this has just been amazing, and all of your words were so powerful. We were very appreciative. So thank you so much. Any other comments from the panelists as we are wrapping up with our last we've got about 15 minutes.
I would certainly be remiss if I didn't mention that my wife's a proud graduate of Hazard Community College.
I wanted to say one last thing, since we had Jamaica here as a student. But when we think about success, Dr. Linden, we have to think of it in what is considered the 4 pillars, right? Because when we look at and define the success of any human being, it operationalizes around 4 pillars. And I think you may have set this up with that purposefully. So if not, I'm going to say you did. One is that we have to look at the role of family, the role that families play in the way that they prepare their child to think about life, think about culture, to think about a variety of things. I was just thinking of Jamaica's mom coming on here. That's a good example, right? That she purposefully had to do that. Now, it just so happens in Eastern Kentucky, it may not be a biological parent. It could be a grandparent. It could be someone acting and that's throughout America, by the way, not just in Eastern Kentucky. But how do we involve families into the success stories? That's us. That's on our back. Number 2 is community. I think what PG and Emily's bringing to the table here. I mean, the role of communities are powerful in building our success stories of our young people. So how do they play? Are they proactive? You know, are they like the Urban League in Lexington? Are they proactive, like what you're doing with this museum? Are they out doing those things? Those are crucial to the conversation. But the most powerful piece of the community will be peers. Are we organizing in such ways that peers can play an important piece in this discussion? Number 3 are the educational institutions we represent? Are we building it the way we want to? Are we doing what we need to do, whether it's Berea College or Hazard Community and Technical College? Are we designing it in a way that's purposeful toward getting rid of racism? Are we designing it in a way that's purposeful toward inclusion and equity? Those are the pieces we need to think about. And third, are we building a Jamaica, that student, in other words, him or herself, are we giving them the power of agency to combat whatever comes at them? Are we giving them the power of agency to actually provide not only for themselves, but for people that come after them? Those four elements, the families, the community, the educational institutions, and the person, him or herself, in this case, the student, him or herself, are we doing those things in a way that is purposeful? Just so happens, our educational institutions may have to replicate families. They may have to replicate communities because not everybody's coming from that perfect place. That's what we're called to do as educators. That's why I thank you, President Linden, for inviting me to be a part of this panel.
Yes. And also, I would like to add, Dr. Thompson mentioned doing a self-assessment, and in part of that self-assessment, and if you're coming to that place that you don't know, attending webinars just like this is also a good way to learn about our journeys, as well as learning some tools of how that you can better your community or your institution. And this is a shameless plug, but also another good way is to attend the Kentucky Association of Blacks in Higher Education annual conference, and I put it in the chat box if you all would like to check that website out. It's just $100 for registration right now, and so that would be April 14th to the 16th, and it will also be virtual. And so that would be another opportunity. We will be talking about the revolution is now televised, overcoming and dismantling systematic racism from 1619 through COVID-19. And so this is also another opportunity for you to engage and just learn and to soak up more information in regards to racism.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Well, thank you again to all of our panelists. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that it is the first of many to come. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.